Welcome to MetaPod, the podcast where we discuss operational execs and organizations that make and move stuff, and our common headaches, digital transformation, the forever labor shortage, and doing more with less. And now, the host of MetaPod, Ron Crabtree.
Okay, so in this episode of MetaPod, Ron Crabtree here, by the way, we're going to take a deep dive into supply chain, but the impact around digital transformation, artificial intelligence, and other elements of digitization, and how they impact or should be impacting you. What are the things you need to do about that? And I'll be allowing Sanjay to introduce himself in a minute, but he's going to provide for us kind of a diagnostic of what are the top three things from the supply chain digitization perspective we probably should be looking at and determining whether or not we have to go after that and do something about it. And then follow that with practical advice. Okay, so now if you've determined that's something to address, here's the practical things you should go do to do something about it effectively the first time. So before Sanjay introduces himself, I've known him for a number of years, and he's kind of on my speed dial when I think about we've got a problem, a complex, difficult question around digital transformation, IT, and things like that. Kind of a short list of folks I'm going to reach out to. In fact, back in 2020, we contracted with a large international e-learning company, and they asked us to put together an all-new e-learning program around digital transformation awareness. Sanjay is one of the meta experts I grabbed on the team, pulled in as one of our subject matter experts, and we built out together. There were more than almost 30 different important elements that kind of go into digital transformation, and we actually mapped that against supply chain and operations and quality and other different functions, created 9 different courses. And fast forward, that organization's enjoying, Gartner Magic Quadrant for digital transformation awareness. And Sanjay got a hand in helping to create that content. So definitely one of the folks that I turned to very quickly. So before we get going on the diagnostics, Sanjay, why don't you introduce yourself to our audience?
Thanks, Ron. And I'll say that your point about calling me and having me on the speed dial, it has been a fun experience. And every time you call me, it's like, what kind of problem am I going to hear about? It's always interesting and challenging. So look forward to continuing to have those kind of calls and conversations. Appreciate that. Thank you all. So introducing myself, Sanjay Khunger. I've been in, I'd say, just working on digital transformation in one form or another. Used to be called business process re-engineering, system engineering. Now more recently, of course, everybody calls it digital transformation. For about almost 30 years now, started first on at Xerox and Kodak in the upstate New York area, started first on more system engineering type of work, re-engineering type of work, then moved on to, I'd worked at General Motors for quite a few years on the supply chain side, their order delivery process, and then after that at OnStar, all around innovation and digital transformation. So typically, I've come in into organizations at the problem more from a technology side. So it's more how do we bring technology to solve a certain problem, whatever that problem might be. Typical, again, as you can say, digital transformation, right? But it's not just technology to solve the problem. It's also sometimes process that goes with it. So it's a process and technology solutions to business problems. And oftentimes it's not just business problem. Now, actually, I work for the metro parks here in the Detroit area. So it's not necessarily a business problem that is a typical business problem. It's more of a social problem. How do we get more people in the parks? How do we address and provide more services to our visitors and patrons? So it's those kind of problems, all looking at from the perspective of how can we bring technology to solve some of these challenges and help folks and businesses in their journey.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, you're talking about, the Detroit metro parks, and what's that got to do with supply chain? Well, every organization has a supply chain problem, and, demand, how are you going to prepare for it? How are you able to service, care for, deal with, et cetera? So it's a global problem, and it affects every business. So with that, let's pivot and talk about, your diagnostic. Now, to be clear for the audience purposes, supply chain is a big discipline. And when we put together all that content for the e-learning program a few years ago, There were a lot of elements that impact supply chain performance. We certainly can't touch on all those today. So Sanjay picked 3 different common domains, if you will, areas where, it's likely that you've got problems and you need to do something differently. So we're going to focus in on this top 3 diagnostics. So I'll let you pick the first one that you want to talk about there.
Sure. So within supply chain, actually, before I even get to that, I also wanted to, and maybe your audience already knows about it, just wanted to talk about the overall digital transformation. You talked about the work that we've done in the digital transformation in the past. In my mind, digital transformation is a much broader concept. As we all know, it's an application of various technologies, primarily digital technologies, to streamline and optimize the processes and digitize the data. And nowadays we hear a lot about artificial intelligence, and AI. From my perspective, is a kind of a subset of those digital technologies, right? So at the end of the day, when we talk about digital transformation, there's a whole set of technologies, and a large subset of that could be clustered or combined under the AI grouping, and which could include machine learning, it can include natural language processing, all the computer vision, a lot of the sensors that we see out there. Those are all kind of we could call them as AI, because nowadays they're getting wrapped up in a lot of algorithms, which are learning algorithms, so that they all fall into the AI. So when we further on have this conversation around some of the challenges that we are seeing in supply chain, that our companies see in supply chain, and where at least my thoughts are, I won't maybe talk too much about the broader digital transformation, because AI, I think, is more on people's mind at this point. But we'll hone in on some of the AI-specific discussions related to that is what I will say, though. There's a lot of hype about AI, and AI solutions are still, I'd say, quite hyped. So you'll hear a lot about all sorts of solutions in the marketplace being talked about, but take them all with a grain of salt, right? I mean, nothing is perfect at this time. So anything that is put in place in the industry, in businesses, in production, just be careful that don't rely on it too much and expect that it's going to be the miracle solution for anything. Human intelligence still tends to trump AI, and just be careful not to replace human intelligence in a hurry with artificial intelligence. So that's the only broader discussion I'll start with before we jump specifically into the supply chain conversation. So going back to your question around supply chain, the first thing that I've seen oftentimes, that I see a lot of companies that people see, is some of the data inconsistencies and incomplete analytics models out there that can affect quite a few processes. Demand forecasting is a classic one, right? So those are some of the challenges that a lot of companies do face. I'm sure there are others, and they tend to lead to incorrect demand forecasting, which of course have impact on some downstream on inventory management and other things. So that's what I would say is the first place to start. If you see some kind of problems on that, look at solutions which are more AI-driven solutions which bring in more of the advanced analytics, predictive analytics, and bring those in. They'll identify some of those data inconsistencies. They would help companies to identify these data challenges and also improve their analytics of not just the sales data, but also a lot of the contextual data out there. Bring that all into the mix to improve the prediction and of course the better demand forecasting. That of course would, like I said, help optimize inventory levels and help them not overstock and stuff. Right, Ron?
Yeah, so I'm going to expand a bit on that. Sanjay admits he's not a supply chain expert, and I sort of am. And so there's some pieces here that are really important. We talk about demand management with sales, inventory, and operations planning. It's the speed at which you can turn that around. Some organizations spend weeks to put together a new SIOP plan because they're spending all this time manually aggregating data, trying to get to spreadsheets and, getting to a data set they can actually do something with. And the faster you can create that just to provide the inputs, the better. And then secondly, one of the things Sanjay said that's important is intelligence, right? In other words, at what's called edge sets or technologies. What's going on in the field with respect to demand that's impacting what we should be doing with the mix of what we're doing, and then all the way upstream on the production side, what's going on out there that we should be aware of from a supply chain risk perspective. Should we be adjusting our sales forecast based on shortages we're anticipating? Or should we adjust for its sales forecast because we know we're going to have extra, cost-effective, goods that can feed our supply chain? There are a lot of pieces around this that can be impacted with respect to just what we call demand management or sales inventory and operations planning. So let's move on to the second area you think we should take a look at.
Yeah, second area, I look at it from perspective, the challenges I've seen and heard of it are more around warehouse optimization. A lot of companies, we talked about the inventory management challenges, right? When they couple them with order fulfillment complexities, and nowadays you still continue to hear about the labor shortages out there. Those are some of the indicators companies should look at what they can do with warehouse optimization technologies. And this is where there's a cluster of technologies. You got solutions for warehouse management, which are now becoming smarter and smarter over time. You got sensors that can be put in place in various places along the warehouse management process. I'll just call it that. It's broad, and just to be able to get more contextual data, more specific data, and just understanding where the process is at a point in time. And then we are also seeing some really good AI-powered solutions in terms of robots, which can do a lot of the repetitive tasks like picking, packing, and to improve the efficiency and throughput. They also would be great, have been very good in freeing up the human workers. And as I mentioned about the labor shortages, right? So as wherever we're seeing labor shortages, a good place to fill that gap too. But again, back to my earlier point, be very careful. They are not a replacement. They are typically an augmentation of human workers, where the human workers can be freed up to do more complex work.
All right, so I'd like to piggyback on that just a little bit. You've touched a couple of things that are really important. The MetaPod series is around the three things that people really are struggling with, right? The fact there's an ongoing forever labor shortage. We're challenged with figuring out how to digitize, automate, and we've all got to do more with less. And warehouse operations are a great classic place for that. So the key metrics that organizations focus on would be like on-time in-full rates. This is a measure of the quality and the repeatability on time to deliver complete orders to customers. Well, if we're tracking and measuring that, that would indicate whether that's an area we need to improve on. So we can do the breadcrumb trail upstream to why is it we're failing in that regard, right? And then that gives us signals about where to surgically apply digital transformation methods or artificial intelligence, robotics, et cetera. Same thing around, hey, our costs are too high, we're not competitive, our cost per pick, if you will, is out of line. We've got to do the breadcrumb trail. Now, what's driving that? Is it truly the manual processes that we can figure out how to automate? There's a lot of human error in there. There's a lot of rework. Let's attack the root causes with automation. So I'll shut up there, but just to give a little bundle here to Sanjay's point, this is not a silver bullet. It's death by 1,000 cuts. Got to be very surgical, carefully apply. So what would be the next diagnostic?
Well, more than diagnostics, this is, again, I don't know, maybe I'm a little bit too cautious with all the new technologies. It's more around that I find oftentimes, and that's, I honestly, I get into the same trap. When a new technology comes in, like, oh my gosh, this is going to really solve the challenge or solve my issue. That's where the over-reliance on anything, and with the current push in a lot of ways in terms of the heavy drumbeat of artificial intelligence that's going on, I feel like there seems to be an over-reliance on AI that's being pushed. And that's where I just continue to point out that any technology, any tools that are out there, just watch for how well they are doing. You talk about the breadcrumbs, right? Following the process. And not just from the perspective of current process, look at the current tools themselves. See what they are doing. Don't just assume that they are doing they are perfect, because there are always better opportunities, better to tune them, better to improve them, or replace them even. So that's the only thing I'd point out is don't have too much of a reliance or over-reliance on tools, and specifically on AI. Because what happens, as I've seen, is they tend to a lot of brittleness of the system, especially some of these advanced analytics, advanced intelligence systems, smart systems, where certain solutions just when there are issues where human intervention is required, if that humans have been replaced for some reason, now you have created some breakpoints in the system, and that is where the brittleness comes in the system. So just watch for that these systems need to work very seamlessly, carefully, well with the human counterparts, because they really are an augmentation of the people and processes that are out there, not a replacement.
Yeah. So what's your recovery plan for when things break?
Right.
Just think about our business. We're super reliant on having a good internet connection coming into the house because we're communicating with people all over the world all the time. We have lots of automation and communications out to the experts we're recruiting to be part of our network, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, I'm paying to have a line buried from the street and brought in so we can get fiber because the cable just doesn't get it done. It has issues, and we have to move away from that. And that's an enterprise risk for us. And that's what organizations have to address is, if you're going to do all that, that's great, but what's the backup plan? What's your recovery plan when things break down, right? But change happens, unforeseen changes like a big hack, right? The infrastructure goes down in an entire country, so you're not getting data out of that country. That happens in third world countries a lot, right? Which are supply points for a lot of goods coming into the United States.
Sure.
They go down. Things happen, right? Earthquakes, you name it. So what are you doing to protect your business from that vulnerability by going too far with the automation, or not really having carefully thought about what do you do when things break? So thank you for those observations. So
business continuity plans are extremely important. It's funny you mentioned that. We have in the Metro Parks 13 parks, 25,000 acres that we manage across the system. And every park has so many locations in there where people visit and want services. While each one of these is an independent location, trying to get network to every location. Think about it, right? These are locations that AT&Ts and the others, even the wireless carriers don't serve. They are dark points, dark locations, even from a wireless perspective. So we have to work on not just the primary connectivity, but then the backup connectivity, and especially with today's, then when storm systems come in, they knock out power, especially as you start talking about remote buildings, or they knock out internet. Those are all things that we have to think about as part of our contingency planning, as far as our disaster recovery planning and all that stuff. So yes, so that's a great point that you pointed out. Yes.
All right, perfect. So let's pivot now and get into what do you do, right? So now the audience is really interested in learning from you. Okay, great. You've determined, for example, we need to really do something about our, demand management side of the business. As a practical matter, what do you go do? So I'll let you tackle some advice for us here.
Sure. I found that, and the advice I have is probably applies not just to AI specific technologies. They kind of change a little bit, and again, be a little bit more cautious. But it broadly applies to any digital transformation effort that anybody is undertaking, especially from the perspective of introducing new technology. Be very careful, of course, where you introduce technology, as we just talked about. So no doubt about that. So I won't over sell that point. But when you start on a project, the big thing that at least I've always embarked on is to explore, evaluate, and then select the right tool. And again, as I mentioned, as we get into some of the newer technologies in digital transformation, AI powered with one of them, those would be something that you want to be very careful.
Yeah. So share with us 4 or 5 things that you would want to peel back the onion and look at to help you separate this one from that one. What would be some of the attributes that you would hunt for in that evaluation? Why would I pick that one versus that one?
Yeah, those are all specific to the problem at hand. So it's hard to say just across the board, but typically you would see, of course, applicability to the problem, right? But we talk about the performance. So if you're talking about demand management as a demand forecaster, rather as the first one, and we said data management, also making sure that the speed is there, that they can get you the results quicker in that situation. Certainly the analytics should be flexible enough. There would be in those situations, I'd even say that it should be usable by multiple groups. It shouldn't be like a technologist or technical person sitting there is the only one who can apply or create these analytics and dashboards. So it should be more openly available for anybody and everybody to see. So those would be some of the things I would list out in terms of picking the technology. But I would say that when you start on the project, identify your success criteria very clearly, and using those, explore, evaluate, and select the right AI model and solution before you jump into the next step.
Exactly. So have you in the past thought there's a lot of value to doing something like value stream mapping, to taking the people, process, and technology and kind of make sure we have the entire, I'll call it, so there's a SIOP process, suppliers, inputs, process, customers, outputs, right? Outputs and customers. But you have to think about all of those and all the different needs and systems that come into play. And somehow, would you recommend it's a good idea to kind of map that before you make those decisions?
Well, I would say, every system and every company has their own mapping process, but there's always a good idea to understand your current state and your future state. And in my case, I've always tried to go first to the future state, because there have been too many projects that I've worked on where people said, okay, let's just first map out the current state so we can figure out what's wrong and get to the future state. The problem is current state takes so long to map that we never get to the future state. So I always said, map out your future state. Where do you really want to be?
What does good
then
look
come
like?
back and
What's
map
good
it.
look like? Yeah, exactly.
And then come back and map it to the current state, say, where am I coming from? Even if it's not fully mapped, it's okay, because we can build the future state and then transition from the current state to that. Because there are way too many projects where the project died after 2 years or X number of months or whatever it might be, right? Because there was nothing done, nothing was shown, because we were still mapping out the current state. So it's much better to map the future state first.
Yeah, you said something's really important there. And, lean practitioners, and I have to admit, I have that bug. We kind of tend to want to be perfect, but, things change so quickly.
Yes.
Especially in technologies, that perfection is the enemy of good. So you need to do good enough, right? Go into the breadcrumb trail, future state, and then map enough of current state to make sure we understand the critical levers and go, right? So something you do in the next 90 days is 100 times more valuable than a year from now.
And that's another piece. I'm a big fan of agile, not agile necessarily to the point of saying follow an extreme process, or an agile process specifically, but more of an iterative process. Don't expect that you're going to finish everything in one go. It's going to be, you pointed out, right, 90-day cycles or iterations. I don't want to say sprints, 90-day the iterations, or maybe 30-day iterations, or whatever it might be, right? But pick that time so you can show continuous improvement, continuous results and output deliverables, saying that, yep, this is happening. It's good for the team morale because they have had something out. It's good to show from the business value perspective that something is coming out. It's just good every which way. And it's also good to show early on that things are working and this product or whatever solution is indeed on the right path. Because if it doesn't, I'd rather catch it in the first 30 to 60 days than find it out after 1 year.
Perfect. So what's next on your list of advice?
So the next would be, spend, again, flipping back to some of the AI stuff. And when you do pick up some of the AI solutions, spend time to train your technologies. There's a lot of work that is required in creating the model, especially the AI models, and then training the models. And what oftentimes people forget is that time to train, just like we oftentimes forget the testing time. We all do. We build it and say it'll work. Well, oftentimes it doesn't. So let's make sure the test time is there. Similarly, there's a training time that's different in anything that is AI related. So there's different models, deep learning, or whichever model. There are different ways of training, but plan that training properly, and then go into testing after that. So that's one thing I'd say.
So let's be clear. When you say training, is that training of just people, or is that training of the systems and the intelligence?
Training the system. Yes, training the system in this case, because AI, just like people have training, because it's artificial intelligence, it does need to be trained. And that's
perfect. I want to be clear about that.
What training? Thank you for clarifying. Yes. there is a training component for the AI algorithms themselves that have to, so there has to be a training data set as well as the test data sets that have to be created. And then once you create the training data set, you train that, and then you want to keep the training data set different from the test data set, and of course the production data set. And that's how, you kind of build your AI systems.
Yeah, this is really good advice because, the audience is largely executives who don't work in technology, right? So it's really important that they glean some ideas around what are the questions I should be asking? What should I be aware of so that when somebody brings something to me, at least I can be an intelligent consumer of a suggested solutions. This is perfect.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a good point. When you ask that question to your implementer, to your supplier, say, hey, where's your training time? When are you creating your training data? That company or that person will say, this person now knows enough to be able to, I can't take shortcuts. And then finally, I'd say is like with any other system, more so with the newer technologies, deploy them, but continuously monitor them. Make sure that we are continuously monitoring and improving your solution with human oversight. I can't stress enough, don't forget the human oversight on any artificial intelligence system, because that's what's really going to confirm that it is working and improve. Because again, the good thing about the AI systems, artificial intelligence systems, is that they do have that improvement built in, but they have to be structured and really set up to make that improvement. So that's an important piece of the puzzle.
Awesome. So that was a really good section around, demand management, SIOP, the overall management of the business side of it. Let's pivot now and talk a little bit more deeply about warehouse operations.
Yeah, on the warehouse automation specifically, I'll pick on some of the robots. When there's the software side, the sensor side, which is very similar to what we talked about. So it's the same process in terms of implementation comes in. You still have to look at putting your current state or future state, and then current state together. Make sure the technology, you pick up the right ones. You go through the same process of exploration and evaluation and preferably a proof of concept. Where it's different in the case of warehouses, especially if you're introducing warehouse automation solutions like smart robots, which I don't know if how many people have had some experience with, or I don't know if you had experience with them, but there's no shortage of a three-letter acronym or just acronyms overall in that space. There is the automated guided vehicles, or they call them AGVs. There's the automated mobile robots, they're called AMRs. And by the way, those are different. There's a collaborative robots called cobots, and then there's a fixed or mobile robot arms. These are just, I think, 4 or 5 of the 8-10 different types of solutions out there available in warehouse management type solutions when you start bringing in robotics in there. And picking the right one again that applies, and then important piece, create an environment where you can test them. Just make sure that this really does work for you. I mean, and in my previous job, actually, I was responsible for the drone and robot as part of my mobility responsibility in my previous company. I was responsible for implementations of the drone as well as robotic solutions. And we had a lot of warehouse automation solutions using robots, primarily AMRs, where we were actually doing a lot of proof of concepts. It was great to see, and we were always recommending, do a long proof of concept, make sure it works for you, so that way you don't jump into these kind of investments and find out later on that it doesn't because of XYZ reason. It may not be process, sometimes it's just safety, simple things like that. When they start moving around, they are not as smart as humans. So if they run into something, if they break something, those are all safety concerns too. So things like those, be cognizant of those and be aware that those are things to watch for. So that would be just the additional piece of making sure there's a separate environment out there to be able to test and validate that they do work. To prove those out in a controlled environment, and then from there, of course, go into the same type of implementation. But there again, go back to the point of saying robots are never going to, at least in the short run, going to replace humans completely. So that's where understand also very carefully how they're going to coexist. At what point, who's really controlling? So if they are guided, then who's going to get the human training now? Who's going to get trained to be able to guide the robots? Or if they're going to work in tandem, how the process is going to get split up, where some of the process is going to be automated with robots, another process is not automated, and then there's the other piece of who's overseeing which components. So humans, where are they going to cross-check and oversee and make sure things are working? So those kind of things, those will be additional pieces in the to-be process and the future process that needs to be worked out.
All right, great. So let's pivot to that third area that we want to focus on for advice, which was kind of around, you know what your future state of supply chain processes to be brittle and easily broken. So we're talking about, forms of robotic process automation for supply chain processes, everything from order entry to issuing purchase orders, doing reverse markets, all the different kinds of things you might do to make supply chain performance better. Let's take a little deeper dive now on what you'd be looking for when you try to do those things. What would be your advice in terms of implementing some of that?
We already, interesting enough, covered most of the conversation, most of those in our previous conversations. But really to highlight and reiterate some of those points, understand the supply chain business process well enough to be able to say, this is going to be my to-be process. Understand which areas of that process are amenable to automation, which of those cannot be automated. And then as the automation comes up, there's going to be modification of the process because there are going to be additional components that are going to come into the process. So just understand that that's where the coexistence of automation through the digital transformation and AI solutions comes in with human intelligence and the current process and then others. So those are some of the big things with digital transformation anyway. Overall, just understanding the to-be process when and where in the overall process can we introduce automation and digital transformation, and that is a key piece. And then the second piece we talked quite a bit about is understand and prove out the maturity and readiness, especially production readiness of the solution. And that applies to pretty much across the board, but more importantly to some of the newer technologies. Whether we talk about AI technologies, we talk about sensor technologies, we talk about some of the other robotic technologies, those are all technologies that are still maturing. And so jumping into it too early can be a problem, and there's a risk in itself. And then, of course, so understanding that and making sure that it'll work in your business context before you do large-scale implementation. And then I think the other thing along with that is the point that as we introduce some of the newer technologies, they do provide a lot of benefits, but also that could impact your business continuity plan. And that's back to our earlier conversation there too, because the more technologies are out there, the more you need to understand what the failure points are, so you can then have a contingency plan for those too, when those things don't work, whether it's network connectivity, as we talked about, or some of the other more interesting technologies out there. And then final point I would say is don't rush to replace human intelligence in any part of the puzzle there with any of the digital transformation that we're doing, whatever the vendor might say. I think many of us have lived through at least I have in the last 3 decades, when relational technology came around, it was going to solve everything. When SOAR technologies came along, it was going to fix everything. Every time the vendors will sell you that this is going to fix everything, but it never does. So just remember that that's never going to be the case. There's always going to be maturation of these technologies. So slow roll is always a good thing from that.
All right. Yep. Surgically implement carefully. There's no silver bullet.
That's the one thing I've learned in my career.
All right. Awesome. So we're going to get into wrap up now. That's been an awesome conversation, Sanjay. Wow. I really appreciate, the insights you provided. You've forgotten more about this stuff than I'm ever going to know. So I really appreciate that. So in case folks want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
LinkedIn is a good way. I think they could certainly reach out to you, and you know how to reach me. I'd love to get those calls from you, and with the thorny subject to dig my heels in. And if any other way, there's also actually LinkedIn is probably the best way, because I monitor LinkedIn messages, and then rather than giving any phone numbers that might change or emails that might change, just reach me out on LinkedIn or through you. That would be great.
Awesome. Sanjay, thanks so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you for joining MetaPod. For requests on topics or to ask questions, you can connect with Ron Crabtree 3 ways: via email at metapod@metaexperts.com, via LinkedIn, or by calling him directly at 734-425-1455, extension 103. Lastly, if you love the show, please consider leaving a 5-star review on your favorite podcast app. We truly appreciate all your support.